continue this series on the prodigal God. I know as I've been preparing and reflecting, it's been good to reflect. I guess I should speak of what Kim mentioned, just in case you were in church on Sunday, even though I don't want to mention it. And my friend says that I probably got a cold because one gets colds when one is really stressed and emotional. So maybe that's true. But so on Sunday, it was Announcement Sunday for the Florida United Methodist Churches, and they announced that Dan and Aaron are continuing another year here at Trinity, appointed for another year. And they mentioned that I'll be appointed to a church in Fort Myers beginning in July. So just wanted y'all to know that in case you weren't there on Sunday. So bittersweet times, but let's look at the prodigal God. Last week we looked at an overview of the context of the time and the original hearers of this parable, which is often called the prodigal of the lost son, right? The prodigal son. We talked about the fact that the parable would be better called the parable of two sons, or the two lost sons. I mentioned that it sometimes is a sentimentalized story, where we often hear solely based on the younger son and that kind of relationship with the father. We talked about prodigal meaning recklessly spendthrift, and that it's describing both the younger son as well as the father. And I was asking myself, and was hoping y'all would ask yourselves throughout the week about the differences of how Christianity was viewed in its original time of birth and versus now, how we've changed in those ways. We also talked about insiders and outsiders, the two groups that were being addressed in this story, that were actually there listening to Jesus, the tax collectors and sinners, same thing. The Pharisees and teachers of the law, and just kind of that dynamic. I hope you've also been reflecting on the idea of lostness. And these are words that I was wondering how you receive them, because they're all insider, outsider. What does that mean? That could mean many different things and could bring different connotations, including lostness. But we're going to talk about lostness a little bit more today. And does anything else stand out for those of you who were here last week? Anything from the parable that you can think of that I'm missing, worthy of remembering? Well, today we're going to be looking at Act 1 of the 2-act parable, and it'll be the younger son. So let's look at Luke 15, verses 11 through 20, and it reads this way. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." And this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. A little bit more context. Not only to who the groups that Jesus was speaking to are important, but the culture itself. This, for one, is a culture that puts a great value and respect on family. I kind of feel like I can relate in many ways, as the Latina culture is very similar in some ways as well. Many other cultures are this way as well, where family is a big deal. Life revolves around family. Family is important. Respect to your parents specifically is a big deal. To disrespect your parents would be tragic, would be, oh my gosh, that would crush me if I somehow disrespected my parents, right? So this is, Middle Eastern culture is very much that way. For several different reasons, the hearers of this highly also patriarchal society would have been dismayed and angered at the younger son's request. For one, the fact that the son was asking the father for his inheritance while he was still living was an unheard of sign of disrespect. It would have been the equivalent of telling his father that he wished the father was dead. That the relationship between father and son was a means of acquiring wealth, and that basically the son was kind of done with that relationship. I don't really want to continue with this. I just want the father's things, not really the father. Henry Nouwen calls this a radical rejection, is what happened in this parable. The request was also great because in reality, the older brother, the older son, was supposed to get twice as much when the father died, of course. And so he would essentially get like 2/3 of it. And so the younger son not only wants a third right now, but he wants to dispose of it as he pleases. In order to do this, the father would had to sell property, as that's where the wealth and position in the community was. It was in real estate. So he would have to sell land holdings. The Greek word used here for property actually means life. So the father was being asked to tear apart his life, in addition to the heartless rejection of the community and family that had nourished this younger son. Now, the expected response to this request of a Middle Eastern patriarch would have been to be kicked out, like, by blows. Like, it wasn't to acquiesce to the request, it was like, beat him out of here kind of response would have been the typical response in that day, and still today in this kind of culture. And I mean, the reality is the expected response from some of us, given the understanding of how great of a disrespect this was, is probably not too different than offering some blows. When we are disrespected, our response is kind of often anger, and we want to retaliate. It's not like a submission or a compassion or anything like that. Not to bear the agony of the rejection, but a response that kind of makes us not think of the pain that we're going through. But before we move on to scene 2, where we see how, and even before scene 2, how the father responds, but then what happens in scene 2 of the first act, let's look, I want to kind of pause and look at what was happening here for the son. Kind of why this response of leaving everything, of leaving everything he knew, of leaving his family in such a disrespectful way, of leaving his country, of leaving his tradition, his culture, his religion. I don't want to make it solely, again, about the younger son, but that's what we're looking at today. So in many ways, we can relate to this as well. If we're looking at the idea of lostness, in literal ways we think of this. Like I actually had a conversation with someone today of someone who's in college and they're, quote, was like destroying their life, throwing their life away. They are now on the stage where they are leaving everything, they're wasting money, they're hanging out with people they probably shouldn't hang out with, they're doing drugs, and so that's like a very literal way. Like that happens sometimes in younger people's lives. Not only younger people, but there's that stage, right, where this often happens. And maybe y'all have some stories where, yeah, I did that. And it is a dangerous time because you never know what might happen during that time. Like, what if you don't have time to come to your senses like the younger son kind of thing? But for me, as I've always said, kind of a goody two-shoes. I'm embarrassed about it, but it is what it is. I relate in a different way. And that doesn't mean that even if you have related to it in a literal way, you can't relate to it this way. But there's also a sense of spiritual lostness, and one that happens often, and one that, honestly, as I've been thinking of it, yeah, it made sense. I kind of do that as well. And so I wanted to talk about that too. Again, for me, I've been reading, I love Henry Nouwen. He's almost, I could call him my mentor, one of my mentors, even though I never met him, but he has been so influential in my life, and he talks a lot about this. So I relate to him in this way, in the idea of lostness and what lostness looked like. For me, lostness has been something of a denial of who I am, of my core identity, which I have established at some point in my life. I realized that identity, that thing that does not change, my identity, I would say, is God's beloved daughter. The idea that I belong to God, and the truth of God in me and God's love for me. That's kind of what I look at as my core identity, who I am, how I would identify myself. So leaving home, I've been thinking of it as living as if I do not yet have a home, or of that rejection of the reality that I am beloved of my Father. This is often manifested in me when I doubt, worry, and obsess constantly about other things, about everything other than God and God in me and my identity in God. When I put importance into other things and flee the hands of blessing, desire things over the Father. I follow voices other than the beloved voice that reminds me of who I am and what's important, and says that I am God's beloved in whom God is well pleased. But instead, I listen to the voices that speak of unworthiness, or of judgment, or of pulling self up by bootstraps, or of societal norms, or of looks or weight or relationship status or vocational ladders. There's lots of voices that go around in the world and in our culture. And when I seem to listen to those voices more so than that other voice that is calling beloved, that's when I feel like I begin to get lost, where the lostness seeps in, where I stray from home and go to a different place. And I lose myself in these voices, and they dominate my life and pull me to that distant country, and they result in, as I begin to notice or look, in anger or greed or resentment or jealousy or a desire for revenge or rivalries that begin to happen. But when I pay attention to the thoughts that go around in my mind and I notice these things, I notice then where I am, and I notice that the voices don't sound like my Father's. And I hope to begin to lose, to get out of that lostness. Not of thinking of being disliked or blamed or persecuted or worrying about being rich or well-known or about power, but move closer to the Father's home. I end up feeling, when I get into these forgetting about my Father's home, to continue this analogy, it's almost like feeling like a small boat in the ocean, which is moved by wind and waves. There isn't that security that is found at home. Defined by the world and others, in bondage, in the conditional world, the world full of conditions and addictions and other gods. So I hope, want to ask you, so what are your addictions, so to speak, or the things that pull you away from home, the place where you are God's beloved, in whom He is pleased, the place where you squander the gifts that the Father has given you? What is lostness for you? How do you experience it? Are experiencing it? Are needing to be cautious of it. So we do see that the father responds very differently than what I'm thinking I probably would have responded. He does all of that. He tears his life apart for the son. And so the son leaves home, and in scene 2, act 1, the son squanders all through out-of-control life. Every time I read the wild living, because it's funny how they put it in the NIV, wild living, I have this flashback of Ricky Martin's Livin' La Vida Loca for some reason. And I thought you all should know that. But he was living La Vida Loca, right? Wild living, crazy living, squandering all these things. He is literally down in the mud with pigs when he comes to his senses. And though the story moves really quickly over all of these things, the reality is that there was some true agony in there as well. I mean, I don't think he was like, oh, I'm in the mud with pigs. That's kind of cool, but I'd be a little more comfortable somewhere else. There was agony in his situation. The younger son comes to the realization in a very difficult way that being away from the father's home and squandering the gifts the father gave him have led to, he's emaciated at this point. He has struggled, he's lost it all. He is kind of at the end of his rope, rock bottom, kind of as the expression is. He comes to his senses and he devises a plan. He's like, okay, super disrespectful, can't just come back home. There is no way my father is just gonna receive me. I have to come up with a plan. There is plenty of food in my father's house. How do I come to him and make it so that at least I don't starve anymore? At least maybe I can do something. Because the plan that he comes is that he's gonna beg. He's gonna beg and he's gonna ask to work for one of his hired men. He's not even asking to work in the household. The hired men actually lived not in the home like a lot of the workers did, but they lived out in town. They were kind of like artisans or professionals. They had vocations. So he wanted to work for one of them so that he could then kind of learn a trade and essentially get money enough to begin to pay his father back. He was seeking some reconciliation, realizing he was going to have to do a lot to get there. It wasn't just like, hey, sorry. So he had a plan. He had worked it all out. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go. I'm going to ask him, want to be an apprentice. And so he heads home. And we reach this scene, which, it's like this climactic scene, this beautiful scene, which now one talks about a lot because of Rembrandt's. He explores Rembrandt's The Return of the Prodigal Son a lot. And there's just this painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son, where there's an embrace, and it's really beautiful. But so he heads home, and he doesn't even make it. He doesn't even get there. The father must have been scanning the horizon. And when he sees his son, doesn't just sit there and says, look who's headed home. That little punk. I'm just going to wait here till he makes his way here, and he better get on his knees because I don't even know why he's coming over here to me. That's not what happens, right? He runs to him. Now, again, thinking of culture, all right, so distinguished Middle Eastern patriarchs do not run, all right? Women ran, of course. Children ran. Young men ran. The patriarch does not run. Running requires you show your legs and everything. That does not happen. But this father runs when he sees his son and runs to him and falls on his neck, grabs him. This is, oh my gosh, such a powerful and beautiful scene. The son, surely surprised, begins sputtering his rehearsed speech and plan, but the father doesn't even pay attention to that. He asks for the best robe, which would have been the father's own robe, which would have signified restored status, not waiting for paying back of debt or restitution. He's covering his debt. He's asking for the father's robe. He wants the fatted calf, which most meals didn't include meat. Meat was a delicacy. So in addition to just not typically having meat, the fatted calf was the most expensive of meats. So the rarest of occasions is when it was used. And so the whole village was likely to be invited to this. And there's music, dancing, and celebration to celebrate restoration of the younger son to life, to family, and to community. We're going to be talking more in a couple weeks about that celebration. But God's love, we see here, can pardon any wrongdoing. And this already challenges the elder brother who we're going to be talking about next time. See, the son knew that there was food to spare at his father's house. But what we come to discover through this parable was that there was also grace to spare at his father's house. And in this first act, we see the lavish prodigality of God's grace. Even before the son can recite his repentant speech, we see that love and acceptance is free, not earned, and that ultimately is what grace is. Now we're going to be looking, because this might arise some questions, and so is there no need for atonement or repentance? So what was the point of Jesus? Well, the story doesn't end here, right? This is the first act. And we see the freeness of God's grace here, but next week we'll see the costliness of God's grace. I always love Bonhoeffer because he talks about grace being free, but also being costly. It's not something that didn't cost somebody something, right? It costs God a lot. It's not cheap. But for now, let us not forget the immense joy that comes after that immense sorrow, for that was what the Father endured. The finding after the losing, the returning after the leaving. And the marvelous thing is that God turns death into life. So I hope you keep on pondering the power of God's love and mercy, the ideas of lostness. Where might be the lostness? What are we valuing the Father's things more than the Father and the beauty of the Father? But it's good stuff. I really like this parable. So let's pray and prepare our hearts for Holy Communion. Our prodigal God, the God who is very free with your grace, we give you thanks for this day. Thank you for your word. And for the way that you speak to us through it. Words that are possibly just 2,000 years old and that still speak truth to us this day. Thank you for that gift. And God, as we have explored this day, the idea of lostness, the ideas of where we put other things before you, where we leave home, where we leave the truth of you, and of your love for us and how that is our deepest identity. God, we pray that you may reveal to us the places that need to be tended to. But God, that we may also, the places that need that grace, we allow that to be given to you. God, continue to be with us as we collect our offering, as we celebrate at the table. And as we continue to reflect on this and your grace and your love, which never lacks and of which there is always more than enough. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.